It's Hi, my name is April Martin, and I am a student hireability navigator here at Workforce Solutions. And today I'm partnering with Allison Skaberg with Consolidated Planning Group and with Christina Cabral from Let's IEP Together. And we're going to learn about navigating the IEP process. Just real briefly, if you want to stay in touch with me, we can go ahead to the first slide. This is where I can be reached. I do have what's called follow-up resources on a Padlet. So many of the resources that I distribute when talking with parents or schools are available on this Padlet. And then as far as services that are offered for vocational rehabilitation are pre-ETS services, I have a slide with what those involve. And then lastly, if you need state services and you're not in my area, I've included a slide for access to those vocational rehabilitation services. All right, Allison, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
April, it's such a pleasure to be back with you today. And I just, I think that was, this whole webinar isn't about the vocational rehab services, but, these are great programs in our state. If you're attending from out of state, there are programs in your state as well. But these programs are designed to help individuals with a disability basically obtain and find and keep competitive employment, not underemployment. So there are state and federally funded dollars that these programs have, and there's a lot of resources out there. Most of your schools have a VR counselor, so you can ask about that with your guidance counselor, and there are access to services. And again, April Martin can put you in touch with services in your area if you're not in April's area, but I am a huge advocate for this. And I always just like to tell parents, because a lot of times they don't know, that services start as early as 14. So when we, those pre-ET services, the pre-employment training, transition services that you're talking about, we can really get going early with our kids and getting them up to speed. First, they're going to find out what their impediments are to employment. They're going to do some assessments and testing to find out what those impediments are. And then they're going to put a program in place specifically tailored to your child to close the gap on those impediments so that they can find competitive employment. It's a really cool program. So I just like to mention that a little bit further. I'm a fan. You can tell I don't work for them and they don't work for us, but definitely a fan. I'm Allison Skaberg, Consolidated Planning Group. We are happy to be here with you today. I just wanted to go over a few housekeeping items. We're going for an hour today, so if you're planning your day, you can plan on that. Anybody that is attending this live session will get a copy of the slides and the recording, so you can count on that and you can look for that in your inbox today. And we are excited to be partnering for the first time today with Christina Cabral on the Let's IEP Together. And so we are going to be talking about, really the ongoing concerns as parents that we have as it relates to education. It's kind of from the time they're in preschool and kindergarten all the way through even higher education, that is something that is pressing on a lot of parents' minds when it comes to educating our kids that may have learning differences or some challenges in that area. And so, Christina, thank you so much for joining us today. We are in webinar mode. I want to let people know that. So we can't see you or hear you today, but we do know you're there. And so if you're attending this live session today, we do invite you to put questions in the chat box. We will take questions throughout this presentation. April and myself will be monitoring that chat box, and we'll put those questions out to Christina. So Christina, thank you. Tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you're going to talk about today.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and share this time with everybody. So I have been advocating on behalf of my children and others since about 2015. I probably came into it, a lot of the ways that a lot of parents and advocates and working in resource or Texas workforce come into special education. It's usually a little bit of a baptism by fire. We walk into school with our backpacks and, we're ready to go and excited and kissed on your way. And along the way, we realize that there are additional needs and resources that our children need in order to make progress and be ready ultimately to have that gainful employment, further education, and independent living, which are the three main goals of IDEA. So I very firmly believe that every child deserves a voice at the IEP table. And I work on behalf of our children that are preparing to graduate successfully and move on to whatever their next step is, whether it is secondary education or employment. All of those are valid and all those are important.
I know you're probably going to cover this, but I just wanted to verify with you if your services are for hire. I know, some parents, IEP on their own and they handle things and they've had good experiences with the schools and things. And other parents need a little bit of help. They don't know what they don't know and they want to hire somebody. And I just want to verify if your services are available for hire.
Definitely. So I see parents on a couple of different bases. I have some parents that like to come in, they have all their documents. They want to go ahead and, be at that meeting on their own. And so I do what's called a file review. So I'll go through all of their evaluations and documents and work with them to set up a kind of a game plan, so to speak, for their next meeting so they can go into their meeting and, have talking points and know what the resources are and what they really need to be asking and advocating for in those meetings. And then I have some parents that want me to be full-time with them, which means that I attend all of their IEP meetings or their 504 meetings, MDRs, transition meetings, any of those things, and help navigate those meetings with them. So I'm certainly available. I see parents all over DFW. I also see them nationwide. Zoom, as we're on today, has really opened up that world and that availability to be anywhere. So California to Maine. I've got clients all over the place, and I'm happy to work with you. Just go ahead and reach out to me and we can get connected.
Sounds great. Thank you for that.
All right. So when did we know something was different? We all kind of bring our bundles home. And everything begins at that point. We start kind of gauging them and measuring them up against, our friend who just had a baby. When did they smile? When did they roll over? And then those questions just kind of continue. And a lot of times we look back and we'll go, yeah, I saw something different. We're comparing to our peers, and that's kind of one place where we'll see differences begin to surface. Are we noticing things happening at a different pace? Are we noticing that they're starting to have a bigger divide between what other peers are experiencing or doing in areas that they're struggling? So personally, for me, my youngest was, some things were very obvious, as early as he was in the womb. So he was born with multiple physical differences. So it was very clear for him that he was going to have needs. What came later was realizing that there are also speech difficulties. So as your children are growing and going through preschool and all those fun things, we can kind of look back and go, okay, there's an area that didn't look concerning at the time, but now you can kind of sometimes see that there are areas we may have missed because you just weren't sure what to do with that. Was it just an area that we were struggling in the moment, or was that an indicator that there was a need? So, next slide.
Yes, Christina, I just wanted to ask you, because, we probably have parents all across the board here, parents that are just seeing that they know that they need a little bit more help. Maybe their child's falling behind. We may have some parents here that have a child that's newly diagnosed or hasn't gone to school yet, but will be. They're trying to educate themselves. And so the whole idea of this IEP and 504 and IDEA, we throw all these acronyms around, and you know them and I know them, but not everybody knows them. But it kind of goes back to every child is entitled to a free, public, appropriate education. So this comes down to, and you're going to talk further about, so when we have a loved one with a disability, that, you know, there are accommodations and things that they are allowed by law. I mean, that they can have. So you're going to kind of get into the weeds about how that all works, right?
Definitely. So we're going to kind of start at the beginning, and then we're going to get in there and really, get into the weeds of what IDEA is, and that's the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and what an IEP is, and what a 504 is, how you request testing, what some of those accommodations and alternate curriculums look like, and what all of those different moving pieces that, you don't know, and what you don't know. And what was really shocking for me as a parent looking back now is I raised my hand in school with my oldest, who's now 16, in kindergarten. It was like, he's writing oddly. All of his letters were strange. He was making strange blends. He was not progressing. And I kept raising my hand and saying, something's not right. We're spending 6 hours on homework together. What's happening? And, school often, like the teachers and staff, we were just kind of nodding and going, keep it up, keep it up. I didn't know when he was in kindergarten that I just didn't need to keep driving that wheel into the ground. And I was grinding that poor baby. He was so frustrated, and I didn't know. And a lot of times teachers don't know. They don't know what resources are available or how to effectually request them so that you move that ball down the field and start making those things happen. And unfortunately, this is probably one of my driving reasons for what I do is I don't want another family to go through what I had to go through with my oldest, where to this day, and I'm not sure if I will ever not feel guilty for those lost years early in elementary school. So it's as much of an emotional journey for parents and kids navigating and getting this right.
And I think also, Christina, the key is early, and as early as you can, as early as you're aware, because it doesn't take long where weeks turn into months and months to turn into a school year, and then they're really, really behind, and then it's trying to catch them up. And then that you mentioned the always comparing, when did they smile, when did they do this, and then it's this perpetual, as a parent, we want the best for our kids, and that driving thing, grinding the kid into the ground of like, you got to practice, you have to, it's like every summer, and we're doing tutoring, and we're doing all of these things, and it just makes learning not so much fun. So the key is to pick up the piece as soon as you can and get it moving in the right direction with the accommodations that they need, huh?
Certainly.
I did want to add, as a parent and knowing a few other parents also, if you're able to, for a while when your kids are younger, tutor and help enough so that they're doing okay in school and getting by, oftentimes the school has no reason to intervene because they'll say there's, on our side, no evidence to base a need on.
Yeah, you're skewing the data. You're skewing the data. We think that we're doing fantastic for our children by, shoving them in, Kumon or whatever tutoring ranch, or, having evenings with, their retired teacher that is reteaching them, all of this grade level work. I had a mama reach out to me. She said, do you have any recommendations for my tutor for my first grader? I was like, if your first grader needs tutoring, then you don't need to go to a tutor. You need an evaluation. There's no reason that our kindergartners, first graders, second graders, third graders are going to school after they go to school. None of us want to go to work and then come home and go to work again. And if children are needing additional supports, that means that the way that they're being taught in school is not sufficient. They need what's called SDI, which is specially designed instruction. And you're not going to receive that just by reading to them more. It's not the quantity. Nobody's saying that parents aren't reading to their children or they're not sitting down and spending that time with them. It means they need something more and above what is occurring in general education curriculum.
Makes sense. So this testing is a big thing. And when you talk about the testing and like by law, what people, can get through the public system. And then also, we've always heard about private testing, and talk about what they accept and what they don't test when it comes to private testing, and kind of what your thoughts are on the combination of the two.
Yeah. So actually, if we could go back one slide really quick. So on addressing the need, once we've kind of identified that there's an issue, we have to ask ourselves how we're responding. But there are a couple of different needs that we need to look at. Is this a medical need? Is it a therapeutic need? And is it educational need? These three different models do not always work well together. Their services are different. They certainly do not exclude one from the other, but each model has different aims and different thresholds and different qualifications. All right, next slide. So when we're talking about getting children identified and tested, testing is one area that I really see a lot of missed opportunities. We get familiar with our schools, we get familiar with our teachers, and we chat about things in the pickup line, during open houses or assemblies. I love assemblies, they got me out of class. But these aren't things that need to happen or can really happen in casual conversations. So how we ask for testing really does matter. It's important that when these requests are made, that they're made in writing. You should always include your principal, teacher, counselor, really anybody else on the planet you can think of to make sure that everybody is in the loop. If you didn't put it in writing, it didn't happen. As that formal request starts a timeline. Once you put in that formal request for testing, your LEA, your local educational authority, has 15 days to respond to you. So I would say something like this: Dear Watermelon School, I'm requesting a formal individual evaluation for my little fireball. Areas of suspected disability are learning, communication, and attention. So the reason why I say that is that will cover, it'll kind of cover all the bases. When you're doing a formal evaluation, you really want to do across all areas, and we'll go into that because that's what really gives you a good baseline data for your child moving forward. Where are they at? And whether you're testing in 3rd grade or 5th grade or kindergarten, let's start, and then we can move forward and build. So that starts your 15-day timeline for them to reply back to you. If they come back to you and say, sure, let's sign notice and consent. If you start that notice and consent process to test, in Texas, they have 45 school days to complete all of their evaluations. Some states, it's up to 60 days. But when you think about it, 45 and 60, that's half the school year. So there's no reason to wait. We should have requested testing yesterday. It's always yesterday, because by the time those evaluations come back, and then you have another 30 days once the evaluation is done to have what's called an ARD meeting here in Texas, or just an IEP meeting anywhere else. So you really are talking about 60 to 90 days before you're sitting down for your initial meeting, and you've already lost that whole school year practically at that point. So
I have a question about testing. Like, let's say you're considering entering your child into the public school. Maybe they're in private school. Maybe they're homeschooled. And basically, as a parent, you need to have the testing done because you want to know what accommodations they'll be willing to provide before you enroll them. And what if the school's answer is enroll them and we'll watch them for a little while and then we'll do the testing? Do you have rights on that? I mean, I've heard of that happening to people. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so there are a couple of things there. First is when we do outside testing, the school by law only has to consider it. They don't have to accept all of the data. So we want the schools to do their testing. We want them to test in language and pragmatics and social, medical, emotional, behavioral, adaptive behavioral, and IQ achievement. We want them to do that full, formal, robust testing, because that is where we're going to get all the information we need. And unfortunately, when we go to outside testing, the school has no onus to accept the entire report. So sometimes we are spending money that we didn't need to spend, or delaying when we didn't need to have a delay because we wanted our testing back first. And now the other part of your question, when families are reaching out to school and indicating that they would like testing done, and school is coming back to you and saying, we're going to do some RTI, we're going to do some small group, we're just going to watch them. Watch them is not in IDEA. IDEA states that it is and go back to child find, which is 300.111. It is the duty and responsibility of the local educational authority to identify, locate, and evaluate children in their district with suspected disabilities. It does not say confirmed. You don't need to have a confirmed anything. If there is a suspicion, that is sufficient to meet the threshold for child find. But what often happens is that part of that pushback that parents are getting is because they've asked in the wrong way. They've asked verbally, they've lobbed it at the teacher or the principal as a, hey, I think we need to do this. And we just need to go in with that straight email. This is my formal request for a formal individual evaluation for, my little fireball, and start that clock. So if they don't meet that 15-day timeline, then they're in breach of that timeline. Sometimes when you request, the school can come back and deny their testing. Certainly they can come back to and say, we don't really have a need. At that point, you're going to want to request something called a PWN, which is a prior written notice, which should detail all the reasons and the rationale that the school is using to deny that testing. And oftentimes you'll just see grades. And grades are only one data point. And when you're looking at a PWN, they have to use data from multiple areas. So good grades is not a threshold for IDEA. It is about an educational opportunity benefit. And I have had plenty of families where their children are academically cruising right along, but socially or communicative or adaptive behavior are really struggling. And so those are areas that IDEA is still in play and important to go ahead and utilize. So after that PWN, then you go back and you can request to the school for an IEE, which is that independent educational evaluation. So that is your outside evaluation that comes at the school's expense. And then they will come back and take that data and you can have that discussion with school. So it's pretty rare that I see schools denying that initial formal request, because after that, they're still going to have to do the IEE most likely. If they don't grant the IEE, the school actually has to take the parent to due process.
Okay, I just, you said a lot there, and there's a lot of little acronyms, and I want to back up just a little. So basically you request in writing, you want testing, and typically the school does that testing. And then once you get that testing, maybe you're happy with it, maybe you're not. But if you're not happy with it, then you can request individual outside testing. You called it IEE, individual educational, what is the other E for?
So if you received testing and you don't agree with maybe you agree with the data, but you don't agree with their interpretations, or maybe you don't agree with the data either. then you can request an IEE, which is the Independent Educational Evaluation. And your
Got it.
district will have a list of providers that they contract with. And then you would work with that outside provider to have the IEE completed. And then you can take that data back to your IEP or your ARD team.
And the beautiful thing in that is that would be covered by the district under the IDEA. Whereas when you're doing these out of pocket assessments, they could be $3,000 to $5,000. I've done them with my kids before, and they can very easily be $3,000 to $5,000. So being aware that you can request that through your school once they've done their other evaluations, that is great information. So thank you for sharing that.
Sure. Okay, so, I'm sure we can all think of a few words that start with F. Got a few favorite ones of my own, but in this case, the F stands for full. And I think sometimes we ruin trying to diagnose and get services for our kiddos because we walk in and we say, little Johnny needs to be tested for dyslexia, or little Johnny has ADHD. And then boom, you're going to get a screener, or you're going to get testing that is very limited to those areas, rather than having a full evaluation that is really going to cover, communication and adaptive behavior and achievement, IQ, with all the different brain skills that go along with that. So testing does one of two things. You're either going to eliminate or you're going to identify disabilities. And it's very common to have coexisting disabilities. And we miss those if we aren't testing in all those areas. So a full, complete formal test is also going to give us a great baseline for that student. When you're signing your notice and consent, you want to make sure that your testing is including areas in full speech and language to include pragmatics. And pragmatics is that social speech. That is, you come in and say, hey, April, my dog just died. And April will respond to me and go, look at these Legos I have. That's pragmatic speech. So that's an area that unless you ask for it, often it's not included in that typical testing. Formal achievement, formal cognitive with all, it's called 7 Gs. Your diastatisticians at school will know exactly what that is, but those are all of your brain skills. That's long-term memory, short-term memory, and all those different things that unless you test in all those areas, you're not going to pick up what's called specific learning disabilities. And there are several of them. You're also going to look at formal adaptive, formal psychological or emotional, depending on what state you're in, they'll call it different things. And then all the related services. And this was an area as a new parent, I was definitely not aware of. So you can request occupational therapy in written expression, in communication. If you have somebody who is a complex communicator or nonverbal and needs potentially an AAC device, sensory, fine motor, music therapy, outside, sometimes wraparound services and outside counseling, sometimes counseling for the parents in home training. So there are many things that are available, but oftentimes parents don't know, and sometimes even school districts at the campus level won't know that you can have music therapy. So those are always good things to know about. And for goodness sakes, always say formal. Screeners or informal testing, those are kind of cuss words to me because it's a lot of opinion and not a lot of data to move forward with. All right.
So what if you're requesting a full evaluation and then they say, we're going to do this, or we're going to do that, and it's not including some of those things that you mentioned? Do you respond back in writing if no, I think you misunderstood, I'm requesting a full evaluation and I'm requesting the following things, and then make them say no to you in writing? Or like, what is the process for that? Because I have seen some schools say, well, we're going to do this screen and this screen, but they had eliminated 5 other screens that probably should have been, not made screens the wrong word, 5 other, evaluations that should have been included. So how does a parent respond when that happens?
Sure. And, a lot of times, we find ourselves in a position where parents feel like they're parents sometimes feel like they're begging for things and asking. And, we're not. These are important, tests and evaluations for our kiddos. So what I like to do is respond back to the school and say, should you choose, because it is their choice, should you choose to deny my formal request for evaluation, please provide me with a PWN by close of business. A lot of times that, you'll get, oh, no. I'm so sorry. That's not what I meant. You misunderstood me, because they don't want to produce that document. So sometimes reminding them of, okay, if you're going to deny this request for testing, then you need to produce the PWN. And then oftentimes the velvet ropes part.
So the PWN, again, tell us what that stands for again, so that way we have that in layman terms in case somebody says that what?
So it is called a prior written notice, which sounds weird because it says prior. So you'd think that you would need to have that beforehand, but it's a prior written notice ahead of what the school district is intending to do. So they're intending to deny your request for testing. So you're going to request that prior written notice should they choose to deny you that particular evaluation or that test.
Perfect.
And oftentimes that changes. You're welcome. Okay, so evaluating the impact of your child's disability and how they show up. We all show up in different ways in our social relationships with our friends, our coworkers. It is the same for our kids at school. So, and that for them, that's their workplace. So what does the day look like start to finish for them? When you get them up in the morning, are you going in 5-6 times to pull them out of bed? Do they know all the steps to get through their morning routine, get out of bed, get dressed, brush hair, put on deodorant, and get their lunch and get out the door on time? Or are you really monitoring every step of the morning? And is it kind of like a marathon for you as a parent to get them out the door on time and get them to school? How does drop off look like? Are they just popping out of the car and they're on their way and happy and going? Or is it really a struggle? Are they anxious? Is it hard to get them out of the car? Is there, what kind of notes are you getting home from school regarding, any kind of difficulties or, successes during the day? So it's really like, how do they show up? Kids, just like adults, are impacted by their needs in different ways. And one student with dyslexia, or one student with an AAC device, or one student with a vision impairment isn't going to look like another student. So everybody is impacted by their disability in very different ways. So, really think about how they show up. What are they impacted with throughout their day? Okay, so after your testing is done and you're confirming the presence of a disability that rises to the level of an educational need, support, or you're reviewing it and you're realizing it does not meet that threshold. So when we're testing, we're expecting one of 3 outcomes. The first being that the student does not have a disability that needs school support, or the student has a disability that is not impacting them educationally, or number 3, which is most common, what I see, is a student has needs that rise to the level of needing special education and specially designed instruction with an IEP. So, and we'll go through what each of those look like in the further slides. So possibility number 1, your child does not have a disability that requires school support. So, when we're looking at this, we're literally looking at maybe your child has glasses and they have their prescription with that support. They're fine. They don't have additional needs that are attached to their disability or their deficit. It's very rare that I see this when parents are coming to do special education testing I very rarely see this outcome because usually parents aren't asking, just for the heck of it to go through special education testing. It's because there's a need. That's because we've seen something that has usually been gnawing at the parent for several weeks, months, possibly even years. So I very rarely see this. Okay, next slide. Okay, possibility number 2, your child has a disability that needs support under a 504. So the big difference between a 504 and an IEP is that a 504 is a civil right. It is under ADA. It was never meant as an educational product, because what a 504 does is it provides accommodations. So it's the how something is being done, not so much the what. So, if your student needs supports with a graphic organizer, or they may need speech to text or text to speech, depending on what, if they have ADHD or something else that just needs a support and accommodation. Maybe they move a little bit slower, so they need a little bit of extra travel time to get from one class to the next. So there are a variety of things that can happen under a 504, but it is purely about ensuring access, that they're not discriminated against based on their disability in order to access the building and access their education.
I just have a quick question because,
Yes.
this was years ago, but they were commonly, like, for a kid that has ADHD, maybe that's their primary diagnosis, they were commonly throwing them under OHI for the other health impairment and throwing them under the 504. What is the lay of the land in Texas now? Are children with ADHD and learning differences commonly under 504, or more commonly nowadays under IEP?
Oh, so Texas ranks 50th, 50, in the delivery of special education services. We are dead last, bringing up the rear of the caboose. Unfortunately, 504s, so 504s cost districts about $2. There is a great article came out of the Houston Chronicle called Denied. It was a multi-part series that really spoke to, particularly here in Texas, the purposeful cap that was placed on students entering special education. So there's an artificial ceiling that was placed for many years that, our students up until, I think 2017, 2018, were experiencing the repercussions of that. ADHD, it depends on, again, is the disability rising to the level that is impacting their educational experience. So I have seen some ADHD and under a 504, but oftentimes it really needs to be under an IEP, because that's where you're going to receive some of those additional services in order to manage parts of that disability. But unfortunately, we really push, and it's not just Texas, it's nationwide. 504s are, given up like, tissue to parents all over the place. And then we're told it's some great, fantastic product. But then parents are wondering why their student's not progressing. It's because a 504 does not have any specially designed instruction. So it's not assisting your student with any of their learning differences or how they need to access their education, whether they need things presented a different way, or we're going to learn something different in order to get this done. There's no goals, there's no progress monitoring, and there are a whole lot less protections for the student and for the family. They can call your 8-year-old down to the office for a 504 and ask, do you really, really, really need, this, special calculator for math. And they'll go, no. And then it's off. It's gone. So you don't have, there's no teeth to it. There's a lot less support.
So the bottom line is if we have a loved one with a disability that has true learning differences and an impediment to learning, they really need an IEP. The 504 is going to give them extra time between classes, maybe an extra set of books at home, little things like that. But when it comes down to this child needs extra help, the IEP is where they're going to get that. So I think understanding, I'm glad you kind of spent time discussing the differences between a 504 and an IEP, because again, there's just a lot of numbers and acronyms to a lot of parents, and it's confusing. And a lot of times when you're first coming into this journey, you don't really know the difference between a 504 or an IEP, and whether they tell you as good as you think is, and until you learn otherwise. So thank you for sharing that. That was really good. So let's talk about a little bit more about the IEPs.
Yeah. So actually, if we go back to the other slide, a couple other quick notes on the wonderful 504s. So, my oldest, I like to use stories as examples because it just seems to sit well with people, is my oldest was very much that typical case, ADHD, multiple learning disabilities. And he was initially, they said, oh, okay, let's do 504. And he did not progress. That gap in his reading, because he had a language disorder as well. And the gap kept growing because he wasn't receiving that support that you would receive through a special education teacher and that specially designed instruction, the SDI. And so his ability to comprehend and take in the information that was given to him wasn't sufficient for what was being provided in general education. So, it takes, usually if a child is, I would say, if they're 2 or 3 grade levels behind in any subject, they need to be in resource, and they need to be in resource immediately. It takes tremendously so much longer to support a student if they have reading deficits. If you wait until 6th, 7th grade, it can take double the time sometimes, and you're just losing that opportunity. More importantly, probably for
plus, yeah. I want to say that we saw that too. Like where like sometimes there's comorbid conditions, like for instance, ADHD and dyslexia, like for instance, where it wasn't really figured out until later in the late elementary or junior high years and things like that. Well, also at the same time, 4th, 5th, 6th grade, it's getting harder and harder. The subjects are getting harder and harder. And when we've got a kid that really just isn't reading well, it just snowballs. And we've definitely seen that as well. So that early intervention of even seeing, like, if, we've seen this with kids on the autism spectrum, ADHD or whatever, with those early intervention on if there is a dyslexia problem or other issues going on with their ability to code and all those types of things to be able to read. It's so important.
Yes, that early, that phonological awareness and that ability to comprehend the fluency, the cadence of their reading, and to really understand that information becomes paramount as they go forward. Because as you said, everything starts coming. It's like drinking from a water hose. Looking at school from 1st, 2nd grade to 8th grade, the information is coming at them that much faster. And if you don't have that solid foundation, it just makes it tremendously harder. And then sometimes you'll see behavioral other deficits start coming up because they don't know what's going on in class. And then you'll see a lot of other things rise to the surface because kids get disengaged, they get frustrated. Why am I going to try to do this anymore? Because I have no idea. You're talking about step 5 on the instructions, and I'm still processing step 2. And I have no idea what you said for 3, 4, or 5, because it's not that I'm checking out, or it's not that I'm trying to ignore the teacher. My brain is taking longer to siphon through all of that information. And so special education is a way to assist them with getting some of that, helping them mitigate how they're impacted for their disability. You're not going to suddenly wake up one day and not be dyslexic. You're not going to wake up one day and not have autism. You're not going to wake up one day and not have ADHD, but there are strategies and supports that can be taught to help mitigate the impact of those disabilities. And importantly, now that we have April with us, another big difference between 504 and IEP, there's no transition planning with a 504.
Yes.
You lose out on that piece. And that's so important when we're talking about our kiddos that are in high school. And really in Texas, we start transition at 14. I'll talk about this a little bit later as well. So we don't want to miss out on that opportunity. And a 504 is not going to give you that support.
I did want to real quick just mention that because I've had some parents who have had children on IEPs when they're younger. And the school, as they age, says, hey, your kids have done so great. They've graduated from the IEP just when they need the transition services. And then they're no longer required, and those kids miss those transition services. So I did want to mention that as we were talking about that.
Yes, I have run into that so frequently. A lot of schools are telling their parents, well, in preparation for them graduating, let's switch them to that 504 so they can take it to college.
Yes, I've heard that too.
You don't take anything to college. That's the news for parents. It doesn't matter 504 or IEP. You're not bringing anything to college except for your entire life savings, right? As a parent, that's what you're bringing to college. But whether you have an IEP or 504, you bring your most recent evaluations and document to the student accessibility or disability office at the college campus. And usually because you're paying to be there, they are very willing to support and accommodate your student and their needs and provide those accommodations. Because again, 504 is under ADA, so it's Americans with Disabilities Act, and that's everybody in the United States has that guarantee. So you don't need to lessen your benefit if your student's on an IEP. You don't need to lessen your benefit so you can take something to college. You can take that IEP document to college and they will provide you the accommodations. What you're going to lose is the SDI. You're going to lose your special education teacher and the goals, but you're not going to lose accommodations. So,
we do a whole presentation on higher education for individuals with disability, and we kind of talk about those accommodations on the higher level. But so it is true is there's a lot of changes, but there are also a lot of programs across the U.S. and across Texas that are very accommodating for individuals with disabilities and programs specifically for disabilities. So there is a lot of options out there. And I know we've got about 12 minutes left, but
yeah,
we do have a question. So I want to keep moving. One person said, what would be the motivating factor of putting a high functioning Down syndrome child who is in a resource class, freshman in high school, into life skills? Academics or average, math is challenging. So what would be the benefit of that?
I'm not sure. If you put them into life skills, I'm assuming that they would also be switching them over to a life skills curriculum. So to be changing to unique or one of the other life skills programs. And, what we always have to remember is, with everything that we're doing in special education, it's the balance between harmful effect and benefit, right? And when we're talking about life skills, once a student is in life skills, about only 1% come back out because you're starting to create that gap in what they're learning versus the general education population. So if they are academically comfortable, and then it's just math, I would be curious to have more information regarding what that deficit looks like and whether or not that deficit can be better served in the resource room or maybe they're pulled out just for that one subject. But I would be questioning a whole change to a life skills classroom.
So that might be a one-off conversation that they can take together with you offline for that.
Yes.
So when you, we're kind of talking about these individualized education plans, the IEPs, the acronym, the IEP that we're throwing around and getting that moving. Once the testing is done, like how long does it take to actually get your IEP in place once they have all of the data?
Sure. So they have in Texas 45 days to test, and then another 30 days after that to review the testing data. You'll get a copy of the draft and then sit down and have a meeting. So at that meeting, they will present to you their draft. And that's the opportunity to go over what they're proposing as the goals, what they're proposing as the accommodations. So 45 days to test, and then another 30 to come together after you receive that initial evaluation.
And Christina, I just want to say for parents on here that are thinking about this, don't delay, because you might think you have lots of time. School's out in June or it's out in May, and they start doing end of grade testing in April. So like when she's talking 15 days here, 20 days here, 30, 45 days here,
Yeah.
it adds up really quick. So I would just say, if you're going to be requesting this testing, get your request in writing and get it in. Like yesterday, they just went back to school, or they're just going back to school after the holiday break. So don't delay, because if you start making these recommendations, requests in March and April, then they delay them because of other testing and other things going. And then before you know it, it's the summer, and then it's fall before it happens. And we're already starting another school year behind, with one arm behind our back is basically, so I do recommend moving that along. School will be out before you ever even know it.
Christina,
Exactly. Yeah.
just a couple of quick questions with that timeline in mind. Are those 45 school days, and do student absences feed into that? Those are questions I've ran into.
It's 45 school days, and what the student absences, if it's, a dentist appointment here and there, or a doctor's appointment here and there, that shouldn't impact testing. But certainly if students out for multiple days, and, you're going to go take a week for vacation, and then they're out for another, week here, if it becomes significant, then that could impact testing, and they could come back and request additional days. And so that would add to your testing window. So, things happen, and certainly kids are going to be out. But, I would avoid a family vacation, going off for, 2 weeks to Europe while you're trying to do your testing window. So, let's see, we're looking at the PLAF. So that is the biggest portion that really should be probably the first 3-4 pages of your IEP document. And that is your present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. And in some places they call it a plot, but really what I think of it as is a story of your child. It drives the entire IEP, and it's usually a few sentences. Jimmy is a sweet, happy kiddo who enjoys math and hates English class. Well, what does that mean? And as much as I love my child being called sweet, that's not a quantifiable piece of data that I need in my present levels. It doesn't tell me how to support them. It doesn't tell me how to work with them. So this is a document that is a legally binding federal document. It is meant to support your child for the whole year, so 36 instructional weeks. And we should be spending the time, and we should make sure that we're getting this right. So we need to see what the child looks like in each part of their instructional day, bell to bell. How are they impacted at drop-off, lunch, science, reading, math, art, gym? What does recess look like? What does their lunchtime look like with peers? It should be so detailed that anybody could pick up that IEP and say, oh, I know exactly who that is. That's Timmy. it should pass the stranger test, so to speak. So if somebody did not have a clue about your child, you handed them the IEP, and they should be able to see your sweet little cherub through this document. Anyone should be able to understand who the child is, how their disability impacts them across their educational settings. That doesn't mean just their core classes, educational settings. It includes, art class and drama class and music class. And we should be able to see how they're impacted by their disability in all those particular settings.
Christina, I imagine that some of the folks that are listening today maybe already have a PLAF, maybe they already have this whole IEP, and maybe it's a lot of words on a lot of pages, and it's a little overwhelming to take in. Like, I just don't even know what I'm reading. Do you kind of review those? Is that a service that you provide where if somebody wanted to hire you to review theirs to see if there was any recommendations that you would make to be added or something like that? Is that something that you can do? Because I know that you know the key legalities and the language and what has to be and doesn't have to be. But I think the average person, we just want help for our kids. We just want our kids to get a good education. We just want things to go smoothly at school.
Right.
We're not like trying to be a specialist at all the legalities that come into the PLAF or the IEP. So can you help with that?
Yeah, 100%. So sometimes, whether I have a family that wants full advocacy services where I go with them to all of their meetings, or if they just want to do file reviews, then I want to see all of the documents. I want to see
Perfect.
all of the testing, all of the drafts, anything that you have that helps me know who your child is. So then I can turn around and provide you some suggestions on how to make those adjustments, no matter what type of services you need from me.
I call it turning the knobs, Christina. It's just a little bit. We're not necessarily going to turn the knob wide open and instantly your child that really struggles reading is going to be the best reader ever overnight. It doesn't really happen like that. But if we on purpose turn the knobs a little bit to give the tools and resources that the child needs, then you are going to see over time, them hitting their goals. And I think that's such a key thing. So thank you for that. I think that's a valuable service that you provide. And for a person that doesn't want to be a specialist on this, we just want something, good for our kids and us moving in the right direction. I think that is a valuable service. So I know that we have like 3 minutes left. So let's run through the annual goal. Or you want to just hit on that or just hit the highlights on that?
We'll highlight that sucker. So, your annual goals are part of your IEP, and that's really where you're going to discuss what Billy's deficit is and how you're going to get there. But what we often see is we'll see Billy will do XYZ, in 3 out of 4 trials. Well, what we need to see in that document is what are we providing as teachers in order to get him to do that? So Billy's going to do this with these supports, with this teaching method. We need specific, we need to be very specific when we're looking at our goals. And right now, I often see documents where they're very general and it doesn't tell the teacher what they're supposed to be doing. Let's say they have a sub. Detailed plans lead to better outcomes. So most importantly, transitions. So that's one thing I really want to touch on is that is so important and biggest part of the IEP that we probably leave to last. We don't do that part very well. But as early as 14 in Texas, you should be meeting with a transition coordinator in your district. They should be a part of your meeting. And we want to be asking for a formal vocational evaluation. Oftentimes kids are given screeners. I have seen little booklets with stick figures. I have seen papers where it's like, do you want to wipe the table or do you want to clear the table? This is unacceptable for our students. So it's about looking at what they enjoy. Do they want to be in air conditioning? Do they want to wear a uniform? Do they like people and want to be around people, or do they not? So that formal evaluation will really help you, and it will help transition and building goals so your student is ready. And then you can go to somebody like April or go to Texas Workforce with that evaluation, and they can assist your student in finding areas that really meet what they want, their preferences, and what they enjoy, and what is going to be a successful employment for them long term.
Christina, also one thing I would just want to mention on transitions, I know we're out of time for today, is that it is important, depending on your student and their where they're at. Students can stay in the public school post age 18. I think it's to age 22. Some schools might be pushing your child out, but you do have rights under the law. So if it is your goal for your child, if they're not there yet and they need to stay in longer, there are transition programs. There's all kinds of stuff out there, but you need to look at it early, because if you say nothing and they say nothing, they're assuming that your child is leaving at 18. Okay. And so I think it's real important to look at that. And the other thing is these programs are free post age 18, right? If they belong there and if they're in school, that kind of thing. If they are pushed out at 18 and they shouldn't have been, those transition programs that you're going to get them involved in they cost. They're out of pocket cost to the family. So from a budget perspective, a family has to look at that as well. So today, for anybody that has attended this live session, everybody is going to get a copy of today's slides. There's some additional slides in here. We do have Christina's direct contact information of how you can reach out to her directly if you need support or you want to look at additional, having her look at what you have in place. It's Allison Scobert here with Consolidated Planning Group. We are a holistic special needs financial planning firm. We put webinars on like this all the time, every week, partnering with organizations like Workforce Commission, April Martin. So we're always glad to partner with you guys. All of our upcoming webinars, there's going to be a link in today's slides, so you can register for those. The webinars are always free. And after the webinars happen, any kind of recording that we have will live on our YouTube channel. We also have podcasts as well. So these are some of the topics that we have as it relates to planning for special needs and what kind of meetings on these topics. So you can subscribe to the YouTube channel or look at the podcast for that. And if you need, a personalized consultation as it relates to planning for your loved one with special needs, we are definitely here to help, and we offer free personalized consultations. A lot of times people don't want to put all their laundry out in the chat box, and we certainly understand that, but we certainly look forward to chatting with you. We went a little bit over, sorry for that. It has certainly been a pleasure to be here with Christina Cabral and April Martin, and we look forward to partnering with you again. Thanks so much, everyone.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Bye
Bye-bye.
now.
Bye-bye.